Hey everybody, welcome back to the Maple Grove Scripture Reading Podcast. So last time we were in the middle of Job 29, which is the opening part of his final soliloquy. And Job had moved from his private life where he was talking about God's presence and the children and the abundance, all missing now. But he moves out to his public life at the city gate. And what we found there was a man who held genuine authority, but whose authority was rooted in something specific. The respect came because he rescued the poor and defended the fatherless, made the widow's heart sing. He was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. He was a father to the needy, and he spoke for the stranger at the gate. And he broke the fangs of the wicked when they had victims in their teeth. Today we're going to finish up chapter 29, and Job's going to describe what he expected the rest of his life to look like. And then he's going to close with one final picture of who he used to be. So let me read through it, verses 18 through 25. I thought, I will die in my own house, my days as numerous as the grains of sand. My roots will reach to the water, and the dew will lie all night on my branches. My glory will not fade. The bow will be ever new in my hand. People listened to me, expectantly, waiting in silence for my counsel. After I had spoken, they spoke no more. My words fell gently on their ears. They waited for me as showers and drank in my words as the spring rain. When I smiled at them, they scarcely believed it. The light of my face was precious to them. I chose the way for them and sat as their chief. I dwelt as a king among his troops. I was like one who comforts mourners. So Job starts this section by talking about what he expected. He thought he would die in his own house, surrounded by family, his days as numerous as grains of sand. The word picture he reaches for is a tree. You got roots reaching down to water, dew lying all night on the branches, not dying out, not diminishing, but staying green and fed and alive all the way to the end. And then he says his glory would not fade. His bow would be ever new in his hand. In the ancient world, the bow was the weapon of a skilled warrior. It took years of practice, a strong arm, and sharp eyes. You weren't just going to pick up a bow and immediately be super effective with it. It was a skill that, took a long time to cultivate. To say that the bow would be renewed is to say that he expected to stay capable and effective, vigorous. Not a man who gradually became useless in old age, but one who remained sharp all the way to the end. That's what Job thought his life was building toward. A long, fruitful, full decline into a peaceful death. Surrounded by family, still useful, still capable, still in the place where he belonged. But he didn't get that. Instead, he got the ash heap. His children are dead. His health is gone. His wealth is gone. And the gap between what he expected and what actually happened is so enormous, it's almost hard to look at directly. Job's not being naive here, but he's also not being presumptuous. The life he describes expecting, that's exactly the kind of life that you'd expect from someone who feared God and turned from evil, somebody whose lamp was shining and whose children were around him. And that expectation's reasonable. It's part of what makes that gap so hard. You think about people who've done everything right, who've been faithful and careful and decent their whole lives. And then something catastrophic happens anyway. You get a diagnosis, or you have a loss or a collapse of something that they've built over decades. And somewhere underneath the grief is kind of a bewilderment. They're saying, I thought this wasn't supposed to happen to me. It's not arrogance, really. It's kind of just a reasonable expectation based on how they've been living. So Job's describing that. He thought his roots would reach the water. He thought his bow would stay strong, and then it all came down at once. Well, now Job comes back around to the respect that he held among the people, but this time it's specifically about his words. Men listened to him expectantly, waiting in silence. After he had spoken, they spoke no more. Not because they were silenced or afraid, but because once Job said something, there was really nothing left to add. His words kind of just settled the matter. And then he says they waited for him as showers and drank his words as the spring rain. In the context of the ancient Near East, this image is doing more than just saying that people liked what he had to say. The rain that falls in the spring, was the rain that came just before the harvest. It was the rain that perfected the grain. It filled out the heads and made them heavy. Without it, a promising harvest could fail. People who lived close to the land and depended on rainfall knew what it felt like to be waiting for that spring rain when everything was on the line. They opened their mouths to it, literally, the cracked earth of a dry landscape, drinking in every drop. That's what Job's words meant to people. It's not just valuable or interesting or even occasionally helpful. It's life-giving at the critical moment. Think about coaches that you might have had over the year. There's a particular kind of coach when things are going sideways. You're not sure what to do, but you look over because you want to know what they're seeing. You need their perspective. And when it comes and it lands, and you know what to do because the coach knew what to do. That's kind of the feel of what Job is describing. People were waiting for him the way that you wait for somebody whose clarity you trust when you're uncertain. And his speech dropped on them. That word in the older translations, dropped, is the word for do. It settled gently, quietly, and did its work. There's one other detail here that I think is interesting. Job says that when he smiled at people, they scarcely believed it. The light of his face was precious to them. So Job's normal bearing was serious enough or elevated enough that a smile from him was almost startling. They couldn't quite believe that it was meant for them. And when it was clear that Job was actually looking at them and actually pleased. Well, that meant something. It was precious to them. There's kind of a dignified presence that's being described here. It seems like that, it's different than being cold or aloof or something like that. It's more like somebody whose approval actually carries weight. I'm sure you've known somebody like that, the person whose opinion that matters to you, and notice, when they notice you, it means something, whose good word is actually worth having. A smile from most people can become background noise, but a smile from that person, man, that just lands differently, right? Job says his smile was that for people. They valued it. They weren't sure they deserved it when it came. Now, take a second and think about where Job is as he's saying all of this. He's still on the ash heap. He's been called a worm by Bildad. Nobody at the gate is standing up when he walks in. The people who will stand when Job walks in are now the outcasts who mock him. And we're going to read about that in chapter 30. But the person who describes all of this isn't somebody in a position of honor. He's somebody remembering what honor felt like from the other side of a pretty large fall. Job closes chapter 29 with the fullest picture of who he was. He chose the way for them and sat as their chief, dwelling like a king among his troops. That image has all three dimensions. You got the civil leader who guided decisions and was presiding over things. You got the military figure who's commanding and has a bearing to him. You got the authority that made people look to him for direction. But then that last line just kind of flips everything. He was like one who comforts mourners. After king among his troops, after all that authority and presence, the chapter closes with Job sitting with grieving people. And that combination is the point of what he's saying. He had enough authority that people looked to him for direction, and enough tenderness that people came to him when they were falling apart. He wasn't the kind of powerful person who became unreachable. He was both things at once. The chief who chose their way and the man who sat with people in grief. And now he's a mourner himself. The man who comforted mourners is the one who needs comforting. And his friends have mostly made it worse. That's where chapter 29 ends, with Job standing at the top of his life, describing what he had been and what he was. And chapter 30 is going to be the other side. It's going to look at what he is now and what he has now and what he's become in the eyes of the people around him. So the contrast is pretty stark. It's the same man, but in an opposite world. And we'll get there next time. Hope you have a great day. We'll talk again soon. God bless.